Tando grew up in the dusty village of Lusamana, where every step he took carried a quiet weight. Whenever he walked by, people whispered "orphan boy," some with soft eyes and others with a sharp tone that stung more than he ever admitted. He often forced a small laugh, pretending their words didn't hurt, even though they sank deep inside him. His days were filled with this mix of silence and judgment, and sometimes it felt like the whole village saw him as nothing more than a sad story. The only place where he felt like himself was the old orphanage at the edge of the village. Its walls were cracked and the roof creaked in the wind, but to Tando it was home. Mama Njeri, who ran the orphanage, had a gentle voice that could calm any storm inside him. When she hugged him, all the pain he carried seemed to loosen a little, and he remembered he was more than the name people threw at him. With her warm hands on his shoulders and her soft smile, she made him feel seen, safe, and worthy. In a world that tried to make him feel small, she reminded him he mattered. Tando learned very early that laughing was easier than crying. He discovered that if he made a silly face or cracked a small joke, the younger kids in the orphanage would burst into giggles. Their laughter filled the rooms like sunlight, and for a moment he could forget the heaviness sitting inside his own chest. He teased them gently, chased them around the courtyard, let them climb on his back, and acted like the happiest boy in Lusamana. And everyone believed it. They thought he was strong, cheerful, unbothered. But when night came and the children fell asleep with soft breaths and warm blankets, Tando often slipped outside and sat by himself. The quiet made his thoughts louder. His eyes would burn, not from dust, but from holding in tears all day. He hated crying, not because it made him weak, but because it reminded him of everything he tried to hide. Every few months, a new family would visit the orphanage, walking slowly through the small rooms, talking in hopeful voices. The children would sit up straight, smile wider, and pretend not to watch who the parents were looking at. Tando always stood at the back, hands behind him, trying to look busy or uninterested. But he noticed everything. He saw the exact moment a family's eyes softened at a child. He saw the shy smile the child gave in return, and he felt the familiar ache rise from deep inside his chest, warm and heavy, like a stone he could never put down. When a child got adopted, the whole orphanage would celebrate. Mama Njeri would hug the child tightly, whispering blessings into their ear. The younger kids would jump around with excitement, clapping and screaming the child's name. Tando smiled too. He didn't want to be the sad one in the corner. He didn't want the little ones to worry about him. So he smiled big, bright smiles and told the newly adopted child to be brave, to listen to their new parents, to always remember the orphanage. He teased them one last time, trying to make them laugh so they wouldn't be afraid of their new life. But when the family drove away, dust lifting behind the tires, Tando felt something soft collapse inside him. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't anger. It was something quieter. Something that whispered, "You're still here and maybe you'll always be here." He never said this out loud. When the kids asked if he was okay, he nodded quickly and joked that they would miss him too much if he left. They believed him. He almost believed himself. But at night, lying on his thin mattress, he felt the emptiness like a cold wind passing through him. The ache didn't leave quickly. It stayed for days, settling in his chest like a slow bruise. He tried to ignore it by working harder, sweeping the courtyard, carrying water, fixing broken toys for the younger kids, anything to keep his mind busy. But sometimes he caught himself looking toward the gate, imagining what it would feel like to have someone choose him. Someone who would look at him the way those parents looked at the children they took home. Someone who would hold his hand and say, "Let's go, Tando, you're coming with us." He told himself he was too old anyway. Families wanted small kids, babies, children who hadn't grown used to loneliness. Children who didn't carry hurt deep in their eyes. He joked about it with the older kids, pretending it didn't bother him. They laughed with him and he laughed too, a little too loud, a little too fast, hoping it would drown out the truth inside him. Still, Tando never stopped being happy for the ones who left. He always helped them pack their small bags, folding their clothes carefully even if his hands shook a little. He tied their shoes, fixed their collars, and reminded them to be kind, to work hard in school, to never forget their roots. He made them promise to write letters, even though most never did. He told them he was fine, and they believed him because he made it sound easy. But deep down, every goodbye felt like someone gently tearing a piece from his heart. Not enough to break him, but enough to leave a mark. Enough to remind him that while everyone else moved forward, he stayed behind. He carried these quiet wounds alone, hidden under layers of jokes and smiles. Yet even with all this, Tando never let bitterness find him. He still played with the children, still cheered for every adoption, still hugged each one tightly before they left. Because despite the pain, he wanted them to have what he never had. He wanted them to feel chosen, loved, valued. And though he didn't know it then, those small moments of kindness would one day shape the entire future he was dreaming of in silence. At school, Tando always tried to blend in, but it was hard when everyone noticed the same faded shirt he wore year after year. The cloth had lost its color, the collar had gone soft, and the elbows were thinning. He didn't mind much at first, but children notice everything, and they point out what makes someone different. The teasing started quietly, with whispers and giggles when he walked into class. Then it grew louder. Some boys would tug at his sleeve and ask if he had borrowed it from a scarecrow. Others laughed right in his face, asking if the shirt would one day walk away on its own because it was tired of being worn. Tando forced a smile, tried to laugh along, tried to turn every insult into a joke. But sometimes the laugh cracked halfway, sharp and shaky, and he hoped no one heard how much it hurt. He pretended their words were nothing. He shrugged and said he didn't care. But deep inside, he felt a sting that stayed long after the laughter stopped. When the groups walked away still laughing, he stood there alone, feeling small and exposed. He hated that the shirt showed he didn't have much. He hated that it told his story before he could speak. Sometimes he pulled at the sleeves trying to stretch them so the holes looked smaller. Sometimes he pressed his hands over the faded parts as if he could hide them, but nothing worked. The teasing always found him. Whenever the weight became too much, he did what he always did. He ran back to the orphanage. The courtyard felt like a different world. The tall trees gave shade, the stone path warmed under the sun, and the air carried the sound of children playing. He would sit quietly on the old bench near the kitchen door, breathing slowly, trying to let the tightness in his chest fade. But it rarely faded on its own. It always took Mama Njeri to soften it. She seemed to know the moment he entered the courtyard. She would come out wiping her hands on her apron, look at him once, and understand everything without a single question. She would walk over, tap his head gently with her fingers, and say, "My boy, you're meant for more than Lucimana's cruelty." She never raised her voice, never scolded the world for hurting him, yet her words carried more strength than anything he heard at school. She didn't promise that things would be easy. She didn't pretend the world was kind. She simply reminded him of who he was, not who others tried to make him feel like. Each time she spoke, something warm gathered in his throat, rising slowly until he felt he might cry. But he didn't cry. Instead, he smiled, a small, real smile, the kind that came from being understood. And Mama Njeri would smile back, as if she knew she had stitched a broken piece of him together again. After spending some time in the courtyard, Tando felt lighter. The children running past him made him forget the cold laughter of his classmates. He helped the younger ones with their games, lifted them onto his shoulders, chased them in circles until they screamed with joy. Their happiness washed away the schoolyard cruelty bit by bit. No one asked him why he looked tired. No one noticed the shirt as if it were something strange. Here, he wasn't the boy with the faded clothes. He was the big brother everyone ran to, the one who fixed toys, tied shoelaces, and told stories at night. In this small space, he felt like he belonged. But mornings always came, and he had to return to school with the same faded shirt. He straightened it carefully before leaving, trying not to show fear. He walked with his shoulders back, even though he worried the teasing would start again. Some days it did, and some days it was worse than before. But he held on to Mama Njeri's words, repeating them quietly in his mind when the insults grew sharper. He told himself he was meant for more, just like she said. He told himself that the village's cruelty was not the end of his story. And little by little, her words became a kind of shield. They didn't stop the teasing, but they kept his heart from breaking completely. Even when he laughed along with his classmates until the laugh cracked, he knew where he could go to mend himself. He knew who believed in him. He knew he mattered somewhere. And sometimes, that was enough to help him take one more step, wear the same old shirt one more day, and keep moving toward the future he couldn't yet see but desperately hoped for. As Tando grew older, something inside him shifted. Instead of letting the world make him harder, he became softer in all the ways that mattered. Every new child who entered the orphanage seemed to walk straight into his heart. He watched the frightened ones cling to their small bags, eyes wide and unsure, and he stepped toward them with a calm smile. He offered them a seat, a toy, or sometimes just quiet company. Soon the little ones followed him everywhere. They tugged at his shirt, climbed onto his shoulders, and called his name as if it brought them comfort. Without ever planning it, Tando became the big brother of the entire orphanage. But being a big brother didn't mean his life got easier. His chores doubled because he insisted on helping Mama Njeri. He swept the courtyard, washed the dishes, carried water buckets that were too heavy for his thin arms, and repaired whatever was broken. The hunger in his stomach became a familiar ache. Food was always limited, and Tando often pushed his portion toward the younger kids, pretending he wasn't hungry or saying he had already eaten. No one noticed the way he sometimes pressed a hand to his stomach when he thought no one was looking. He didn't mind the hunger as long as the little ones were full. Loneliness also walked beside him. Even with so many children around, there were moments when the world felt strangely quiet. Sometimes, when the sun set and the sky turned orange, he sat alone in the courtyard and let the silence wrap around him. He thought about all the families who had walked past him, choosing someone else. He wondered if life would always feel this way, with him giving everything and receiving so little back. But before those thoughts could grow too heavy, a toddler would stumble toward him, arms lifted, and Tando's loneliness would fade for a moment. These children needed him, and he needed them in ways he didn't fully understand. At night, when the lamps went dim and the children settled into their beds, Tando lay awake on his thin mattress. The room was filled with soft breathing and the occasional sigh. He stared at the cracked ceiling, letting the dreams he never spoke of rise quietly inside him. Some nights he whispered to himself, barely moving his lips, making promises only the darkness could hear. He promised that one day he would make life better for these kids, that they wouldn't grow up with the same pain he carried. He promised they would have full plates, warm beds, and clothes that didn't fade until they were too small. He promised that one day the world outside the orphanage wouldn't scare them. These promises made his heart race with hope, even on the toughest days. Sometimes he held his breath, afraid that speaking dreams out loud might break them. Other times his voice trembled with emotion he tried to hide. He wiped his eyes quickly whenever they filled, because crying made the ache inside him feel too real. He didn't want the children to see him sad. He didn't want them to worry. So he hid his tears the same way he hid hunger and fear. And yet, some nights, one of the toddlers would wake up and call his name in that soft, awe tone that melted everything inside him. The moment he heard it, he sat up straight and rushed to the child's side. He stroked their hair, whispered gentle words, and hummed little songs until their tiny hands loosened and their eyes fluttered closed again. Holding them made his own heart settle. In those moments he didn't feel alone. He felt needed, trusted, loved in a way that didn't require loud words or big gestures. Even when exhaustion pulled at him, he stayed awake until every child was calm. Sometimes he fell asleep sitting up, a toddler resting against him, their small fingers curled around his shirt. Those nights reminded him why he kept going. He saw himself in their scared eyes, in their small hands reaching for safety. And every time he looked at them, his promises grew stronger. Being a big brother became his identity. He laughed with the children, protected them from bullies, dried their tears, and taught them how to tie their shoes. When someone fell, he carried them. When someone failed, he encouraged them. When someone felt unloved, he hugged them. He gave them everything he wished someone had given him. And though life was still harsh, and hunger still followed him, and loneliness still visited him, he carried all of it quietly, without complaint. Because Tando wasn't just surviving anymore. He was building something inside himself, something strong, something kind, something that would one day grow into the future he kept whispering to the stars when everyone else was asleep. The day the charity worker arrived, the whole orphanage buzzed with curiosity. She walked through the small gate with a notebook in her hand, and a kind smile that made even the shyest kids peek from behind the walls. Tando was sweeping the courtyard when she noticed him. She watched the way he gently guided a younger boy away from a puddle so he wouldn't slip. She saw how he helped two girls tie their shoelaces, how he spoke softly to calm a crying toddler, how he balanced chores and care like it came naturally to him. When she asked him a few questions, she was surprised by how sharp his mind was. His answers were simple but thoughtful, showing a deep understanding of life that many adults didn't have. She saw a light in him, something rare, something worth protecting. After spending a few days at the orphanage, she pulled him aside. She told him about a scholarship program in Mandeville City, a place filled with tall buildings, busy streets, and schools that offered real opportunities. She said he had the qualities they were looking for. At first, Tando thought she was joking. Him, city school, a scholarship. It felt too big, too far, too unbelievable. But she wasn't joking. She sat with him under the shade of the big mango tree and helped him fill out forms, taught him how to write his essays, and guided him through every step. Tando worked late into the night, rewriting, erasing, rewriting again, wanting every word to be perfect. He had never dared to dream this big before, and now he felt both excited and terrified. When the acceptance letter arrived weeks later, Tando almost dropped it. His hands shook so much that he had to read the first line 3 times just to believe it was real. He had been chosen. He had a place. Mandeville City was waiting for him. The moment the truth sank in, his knees felt weak. He laughed, then covered his face, then laughed again. The children around him screamed with joy even though they didn't fully understand why. They just knew something amazing had happened. Mama Njeri came rushing out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. When she saw his expression, she didn't even need to ask. She let out a joyful cry and wrapped him in the tightest hug he had ever felt. Her arms squeezed him with so much love that he joked he couldn't breathe. But he clung to her just as tightly, holding on like the world might disappear if he let go. Her shoulders shook with a mix of laughter and tears, and for the first time in years, Tando felt the deep warmth of someone being truly proud of him. She pulled back just enough to look at his face. Her eyes were wet, but her smile was wide and full of pride. She cupped his cheeks in her hands and told him he deserved this chance, that he had earned it through every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment he had chosen kindness over bitterness. Tando felt something swell in his chest, a mix of gratitude and fear and happiness so strong it almost hurt. The children jumped around them, clapping and chanting his name. Some hugged his legs, others tugged his sleeves, all wanting to be part of the moment. That night the orphanage felt brighter than ever. They didn't have much, but they celebrated with what they could. The older kids fetched water to cook extra porridge. The younger ones made little paper decorations. And Tando sat in the middle of it all, trying to take it in, trying to understand that his life was about to change. When he finally went to his bed, he lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't whispering promises to himself. He was whispering thank you, to Mama Njeri, to the charity worker, to life itself for giving him a chance he never thought he would get. He knew the road ahead would be hard, but he also knew he wasn't walking it alone. And as he fell asleep with a smile on his face, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a future opening wide in front of him. City life hit Tando like a wave he wasn't ready for. The moment he stepped off the bus in Mandeville City, the noise, the rushing crowds, and the towering buildings made him feel small in a way he had never felt before. The city moved fast, too fast for someone used to the slow rhythm of Lusamana. People pushed past him without looking, cars honked nonstop, and the streets were filled with smells he couldn't name. Even finding the right bus to get to his school felt like solving a puzzle meant for someone much smarter. He tried to stay calm, but inside he felt lost and unsure. Nothing here felt familiar. Nothing here felt like home. His new room at the student hostel was tiny, with a narrow bed that creaked whenever he moved, and a window that looked out into a busy street instead of mango trees. At night he lay awake listening to car engines, shouting voices and music from the shops below. He missed the soft breathing of the children, the rustle of blankets, and the distant sound of Mama Njeri humming in the kitchen. He missed the warmth of bodies climbing onto his lap and the laughter that filled the orphanage. Here, the walls felt cold and empty, and sometimes the loneliness hit him so suddenly that he had to press his hand over his heart to steady himself. Money was another battle. The scholarship covered school fees, but everything else was on him. Some days he ate only bread or skipped meals because he didn't want to spend the little money he had. He walked long distances to avoid paying for transport, arriving to lectures sweaty and tired. He washed his clothes by hand at night and hung them near the window, hoping they would dry by morning. His shoes wore out fast from all the walking, and he patched them again and again, remembering the faded shirt he once wore to school in Lusamana. Life felt like it was testing him in every possible way. Classes were hard too. The other students spoke with confidence, using big words as if they were born knowing them. Tando felt shy raising his hand. Sometimes he couldn't understand the lessons as quickly as the others, and he stayed up late rereading notes until his eyes burned. There were nights when he sat on his narrow bed with books open in front of him, tears slipping down his cheeks because he felt overwhelmed and scared of failing. He wondered if he was in the wrong place. He wondered if the scholarship had been a mistake. He wondered if the city would swallow him before he could find his footing. But every time he felt like giving up, a memory pulled him back to strength. He remembered the little hands that used to tug at his shirt, the toddlers who cried for him at night, the children who trusted him more than anyone else. He remembered the way they looked at him like he could fix anything. He remembered promising himself he would make life better for them one day. Those memories pushed him forward when everything around him felt too heavy. Most of all, he remembered Mama Njeri's voice. Her gentle words echoed in his mind during his hardest moments. "You can rewrite your story, my boy." Whenever he sat on his bed feeling defeated, he closed his eyes and imagined her tapping his head the way she always did. He imagined her warm smile, the one that made his fears quiet down. He imagined her standing beside him, telling him to sit up, wipe his face, and try again. And he listened. Every single time he listened. He wiped his tears, straightened his back, and picked up his books. He studied harder. He asked questions. He stayed after class to talk to teachers. He walked into every new day telling himself that he wasn't just fighting for his own future, but for the future of every child who waited back in Lusamana. The love he left behind became the fuel that kept his feet moving through the crowded streets and long nights. Little by little, the city became less frightening. He learned which bus to take, which streets were safe, where to buy the cheapest food, and how to stretch every coin. He made a few friends who helped him when he struggled. His grades improved slowly, then steadily. He didn't feel like he belonged at first, but he kept showing up until belonging started to grow around him. He still missed the orphanage every day, and some nights he still cried quietly into his pillow. But each morning he wiped his eyes, stood up, and chose to keep going. Because deep inside, he believed in the promise he whispered to himself as a boy. One day, he would return stronger. One day, he would change everything. One day, the children who called his name in that soft awe voice would see him not as someone who survived, but as someone who rose. Years later, the day Tando returned to Lusamana felt unreal, almost like a dream he used to whisper to himself on lonely nights in the city. He had worked hard, pushed himself through every challenge, and somehow made it all the way to graduation. When he received his certificate, he held it close, not just for himself but for every child who once held his hand, and every night he cried quietly. Now, with the help of a small organization that believed in his story, he was riding back to his village in a donated truck. As the wheels rolled over the dusty road, his heart beat faster. He wondered if Lusamana had changed. He wondered if the children would remember him. Mostly, he wondered if he was finally ready to become the person he had once promised to be. When the truck reached the center of the village, people stopped whatever they were doing. Women carrying baskets lowered them to the ground. Men paused their conversations. Kids turned and stared with wide eyes. Tando stepped out slowly, dust lifting around his shoes. He stood tall, stronger than the skinny boy they once laughed at. His clothes were neat, his shoulders straight, and his smile carried the same playful spark he had when he used to make the younger kids laugh. But now there was something different in his eyes, something steady, something unshakable. The villagers whispered his name like they couldn't believe it was really him. Some remembered calling him Orphan Boy. Now that name didn't fit him at all. Tando gave them a small wave before heading toward the place that had shaped him more than anything else. When he reached the orphanage gate, he stood still for a moment. The gate creaked the same way it always had, but the walls behind it were worse than he remembered. The paint was peeling, almost gone in some places. The roof sagged a little. The windows were cracked. The old swings in the courtyard were rusted. Each broken piece felt like a sharp poke in his chest. This was the place that had held him when the world didn't want him, the place where he cried, dreamed, and grew. Seeing it like this almost broke him. But right behind the pain came a different feeling, stronger and brighter. It rose inside him like a fire. He wasn't a helpless boy anymore. He wasn't someone who had to hide behind jokes. He wasn't someone who cried quietly so no one would notice. He was someone who had worked for years, fought through the hardest nights, and returned with purpose. He walked through the gate with steps full of quiet power. As he entered the courtyard, the children playing there froze for a moment, then ran toward him in a wave of tiny feet. They didn't know him, but kids don't need history to feel warmth. They grabbed his hands, tugged at his arms, looked up at him with shining eyes. Their joy wrapped around him like a hug. One toddler lifted her arms toward him, and without thinking, he scooped her up. Her laughter echoed in the courtyard, waking up memories he had buried deep inside. Mama Njeri, older and slower now, stepped out from the doorway. When she saw him, her hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes filled instantly. Tando walked to her and bent to hug her tightly. For a moment he was a boy again, standing in the safety of her arms. But he didn't stay long in that feeling. He pulled back, wiped his eyes quickly, and smiled at her with a confidence she had always told him he would grow into. Then he turned to the children gathered around him. His voice shook a little, but he didn't hide it. He called out, loud enough for the entire orphanage to hear, "I'm taking over now. We're going to rebuild this place together." For a second, the courtyard was silent. Then the children erupted into screams of happiness. They jumped, clapped, hugged each other, and hugged him. Their laughter filled the broken walls with new life. Tando felt his chest tighten with emotion. He laughed with them, but tears kept slipping down his cheeks. He didn't bother hiding them this time. He wiped his face and kept laughing, because the moment felt bigger than anything he had ever imagined. Standing there, surrounded by children and crumbling walls, Tando felt something clear and powerful settle in his heart. He had come home not just to return, but to rise, and to lift everyone with him. When the rebuilding was finally done, the orphanage looked nothing like the place Tando had returned to months earlier. Fresh paint covered every wall. The roof was strong, the windows clear, the courtyard bright with new swings and flowers. Laughter echoed through the halls again, not trapped by broken walls but carried freely through open space. Tando stood at the new entrance, feeling the weight of the journey that had brought him here. The sun hit the building just right, making it glow like hope itself. For a moment, he simply breathed it in, letting the pride settle quietly in his chest. Villagers began to gather outside the gate, walking slowly as if unsure they were seeing the same orphanage they had once ignored. Some whispered his name in disbelief. Others stared at the changes with wide eyes. People who once called him Orphan Boy now looked at him with respect, even admiration. But Tando didn't hold any anger. He only smiled and stepped aside to welcome them in. The children ran around his legs, laughing, calling his name with joy that warmed every part of him. He knelt to tie a shoelace here, lift a toddler there, checking on each one like they were pieces of his own heart. He guided the children with the same love he had once longed for, the same love Mama Njeri had given him when he needed it most. Every time a child reached for his hand or called him Big Brother, something inside him melted softly. He looked around at the bright rooms, the safe beds, the happy faces, and felt a quiet truth settle into his bones. He was running the very place that once saved him, the place that held him together when he was just a scared boy with a faded shirt and a hopeful heart. Now, he wasn't just living his story. He was rewriting it for every child who walked through that door.